Hello and welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast, hosted by Daryl Dittmer, where we talk about the fight or fights that so many of us engage in this lifetime, as well as ways to potentially relieve ourselves of those fights. Let's get started. Welcome to When I Stop Fighting, the podcast. My name is Daryl Dittmer. Today I'm joined by Reverend Rachel Harrison, an ordained minister, creator and host of the very successful Recover Your Soul podcast, and a sober human. Thank you so much for joining us, Reverend Rachel. So great to see you again.
Thank you, Daryl. I appreciate being here. I loved having you on my podcast, and I'm excited to be on yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I loved being on your podcast as well. We had such a great discussion, and this is just such a great opportunity for us to continue that discussion and learn more about each other and hopefully resonate with the folks out there that are looking for something like this to connect with.
Absolutely. More people of like mind is the better way to go.
Certainly is. I couldn't agree more. So I know we spoke a bit about my story and we shared some things, and I'd love to just get familiar with or more familiar with your story in terms of moving up through sobriety, and I know you've had some experience with Al-Anon. So how did you get where you are from that sobriety perspective?
Thank you. I think our recovery journey is so powerful because it has such a similar flavor for everyone, and yet it's uniquely our own. My story around my drinking in particular, alcohol was my addiction of choice or non-choice, what came to me. I wasn't raised in an alcoholic home. I wasn't raised in dysfunction. What's interesting is I was raised in a Buddhist, quiet home with a single mother. And now that I look and I can see that there was addiction on my dad's end to relationships. And he smoked a lot of pot. One of my stories is when I was a little girl, I learned how to roll joints, and I would go around to parties with a tray of joints and hand joints to people. So I guess there was addiction. It just didn't look like some other people's addiction. But I grew up in such a calm environment that when I went out into the world, I was really kind of blown away with the complexity of being a human being and the nature of confrontation and how to just be yourself. And so I found very early on that, not very early on in high school, I started learning how to drink. And the crazy thing is, I threw up every single time. I was a terrible drinker. I got sick every single time. And instead of being a normal human being who would think, don't ever do that again, I just decided I needed to learn how to do that better. If I could just control it better, because the reward of being able to be in a skin that I felt uncomfortable in was too great to mess up this piece that thought, this is really poison. Why are you putting this in your system? So I drank on and off through high school, but it wasn't really until I turned 21 that I started really drinking in earnest. And it was really all around discomfort. It was all around how I didn't know how to fit in. I didn't know who to be. I didn't realize at the time that I was a pretty solid codependent. And it wasn't until I went to Al-Anon later that I really discovered how intense my codependency really was. My desire to please and fit in and morph into what anybody told me to be, I would be that. And so drinking allowed me to be in environments where I just didn't know how to be myself. And I didn't know how to have fun. It seemed like the only way that I could let loose a little bit and have fun as well. So by the time I was 22 and I met my husband, who has the genetics of alcoholism, I thought he was cute, funny, and he liked to party like I did, so he was a perfect match, right? So that's how I ended up with my husband, who came from an alcoholic family, and drinking and alcohol became the foundation of how we rewarded ourselves, how we shut down from things that didn't feel good. And by the time we were pregnant with our first child, so I was 26, we were going to a counselor. Kind of a long story how we got there. We were doing some marriage counseling. Nothing was really wrong. We just thought we'd head some stuff off. And we're sitting in this coaching with her, and she says, I'll tell you what's wrong with your situation. I'll tell you what's going on with you guys. You guys are alcoholics. And both Rich and I looked at each other like, I don't know what you're talking about. We're not alcoholics.
Wow.
And she said, if you manage your drinking, if you could really come to terms with your alcoholism, I guarantee you that there will be positive change. And we walked out of that office and never went back. We did not want to look at our alcoholism. We didn't want to admit that this was a problem, but it started something in me that made me curious. And my end result was my husband's an alcoholic, but I'm not an alcoholic. So I was sure that he was, because now I could see it, and it was progressing in its own light. But I didn't recognize for myself that I had it because I was self-righteous and was pretty sure I knew what I was doing, but he was the one who was being the way that he was being. So we knew early on that we had this issue, and it became a dance. It became, what's standard in the big book around managing your drinking. You try to only drink on the weekends, or you try to only be like this. And I could quit while I was pregnant, and I could quit while I was nursing. But if I wasn't either of those two things, I was a daily drinker. And it began to move from how it always does, out of a place of fun and management, into true despair and dysfunction over the years. And I was continually convinced that it was my husband who was the problem. And when we went to the rooms of 12-step 15 years ago for the first time, I went in wholeheartedly to fix him. Fix him. He needs it. I'm fine. I'm happy to not drink if he will change. And so we went into sobriety together and had 3.5 years of sobriety. And that was the beginning of such powerful and profound change in my life. But I didn't do step one. I didn't admit that I was powerless over alcohol. I wanted him to admit that he was powerless over alcohol. And I did 2 through 12 with great success in my life. I actually had some incredible shifts in how I felt, but I wasn't actually under the very tippy top surface of what's available in recovery and healing. And I look back now and I think, why didn't you go deeper? But I have such compassion for myself that that's all I needed at that time that I had access to. There was so much more underneath, but I didn't have access to it yet. I wasn't ready to really look at myself to that level yet. And my husband had stopped going to AA, and I'd done the 12 steps. I'd had a sponsor. I was still going to meetings. And he wasn't going, but I had told him that if he started drinking, I would leave him. So he didn't drink because he didn't want to lose his marriage, but he wasn't doing any recovery. And through that, I became a sick enabler Al-Anon, what they call an untreated Al-Anon. I became bitter. I became incredibly passive aggressive. I tried to control him at every stitch that I could. I became a miserable person in my own recovery. And then we separated, and we both went back to drinking. So it was this interesting journey of how we utilize these addictive substances or behaviors. It doesn't matter whether it's alcohol or porn or shopping or sugar or, phones or Netflix or whatever it is. We all use something. But that journey for me was so important to go through sort of this muddiness, have a touch, a taste of healing, just to see it enough, and then to go back into the mire of it. And then my husband and I ended up getting back together. And what did we bond over? Drinking.
Hmm.
Absolutely. Went right back to the beginning of our relationship where we would go out to bars and drink margaritas until we were, incredibly faded, and did it all over again in our getting back together. And then we're pretty rapidly miserable again. And then I finally got sober for myself, admitted I was an alcoholic. I have a problem. This is about me. I quit worrying about what my husband did. And I started going to the rooms for me in February of 2018 and started going to Al-Anon at the same time. And that is where my life changed.
What a story. It's amazing how and thank you for that story, Reverend Rachel. I appreciate that because there's so many things that I can relate to, and obviously, right? We're both sober human beings, but I think the interesting part to me, or one of the interesting parts to me, is those little seeds get planted as we go, and whether we're necessarily healing at that point, in terms of how we perceive it, or we're not. Those little seeds are in there, and
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's such a powerful. As I look back on my sobriety and I see all those little seeds planted along the way, it's just such a powerful place to draw from as we go.
Absolutely. And when I started this journey, this new time, and it had an entirely different flavor to it, all those seeds started to really germinate. And I started to see a below what I had been such surfacey around, because
Mm.
it's not drinking. It's around healing your soul, which is how soul recovery came. And it's around understanding your entire journey and forgiving and loving yourself. And through that, I became a metaphysical minister because I had always been drawn to spirituality, but I was so lost in this attachment to trying to make everything outside of myself be okay so that I could be okay. That's how I started drinking in the first place. And so to come into this knowledge that I had been given these little markers, these little seeds all along the way that were planting in my garden, but I had to go through the mud. When I look now, I can see so clearly the value of everything that I've been through so that I can A, help others and understand others, but more than that, that I can truly understand who I am and how I created the patterns and the beliefs that came from pain, and why I was trying to use this particular substance and continue to work on staying balanced and not falling into using something else to be awake. It's not easy to be awake, to be honest, but it isn't not drinking, it's completely healing your soul recovery. And then that piece in the metaphysics, which I love being a metaphysical minister, has given me insight and love for myself through everything. And I still find seeds that were planted that I'm discovering as I go along the process.
That's so cool. That's really so cool, and I feel the same way. And some of those seeds, they were planted a long time ago, and they've sort of germinated and take root, and they move along as I move along. And it's amazing to see how they go from that little germination to a beautiful tree or flower or something that just works inside of me and continues to grow deeper as time goes on. One of the things that I thought about as you were speaking, and I've done this myself 1,000 times since I've been sober, is it takes what it takes. It takes what it takes for us, and I think the really important part, outside of just accepting myself and learning to love myself and heal my own soul, is truly understanding that it takes what it takes for everyone else as well.
Mm-hmm.
And and that there's a very good possibility that I am not privy to what it takes for someone else, and sometimes I'm not privy to what it takes for myself. But I guess that's where Al-Anon kind of comes into the picture, right? So we can heal ourselves.
Absolutely. I think the first time that we went into recovery, there was this older woman, this old timer that came up to us, and she said, this isn't about the two of you. This is about you individually. And kind of like going to the therapist, we looked at each other and we said, yeah, whatever. But it is about you.
Mm.
And so when I went to recovery this time and I did 12 steps for myself and I admitted that I personally am powerless over alcohol, I'm powerless over it. And then I went to Al-Anon and took that same step as diligently to admit that I'm powerless over my husband's addiction. And I've got two kids that didn't fall far from the apple tree. I've got two addicts who are 25 and 27 years old. When I went in and could truly accept that I was powerless over somebody else's addiction, everything began to change for me, because then I could see how much of my life I had spent trying to fix and control everyone else around me and wanting them to be healthier and happier. Of course, I wanted to be healthier and happier. My husband still, I don't know, I don't even ask him anymore, but I think that he's, I don't know, 8 months sober. He continues to come to me year after year admitting that he's been dabbling here and there. And I care less and less and less, because what I see is I see an addict who is on his own journey. And I
Mm.
see a human being who's working to grow and better himself. And his compulsion to drink is his compulsion to drink. I am so relieved to be done with the craving of alcohol. Now, I'm on 2 days of no sugar, and my addict is on fire
Mm.
because I have other parts of me that will continue to draw in that addiction. Because if you're not working it, if you're not aware that it takes what it takes, and you don't stay diligent, some other things creep in. So all of a sudden, I've gained weight. Um, I'm craving sugar. I'm watching myself eat cookie after cookie, and thank God I have the awareness to say, "Whoa, Rach, what's going on? What's going on?" And then take the attention to myself and start looking at that process again, because it's always uncovering something. And that craving is incredibly intense. And yet I have all these beautiful tools to be able to look at it from a compassionate perspective and to remember that this is an ongoing journey that is not about the substances, it's about the soul. So it's an opportunity to look at my soul.
That's You're speaking to a person who has just done all of those things and experienced that, and it makes me think of a couple of things. One is that if we're not attending to our body, our mind, our heart, and our soul, if we leave any of those out, we can find ourselves in trouble. And I've been there. I've have been addicted to nicotine. I just yesterday, and I've been in sobriety for a long time and recovery for a long time, but I was able to. I'm going on vacation in a couple of weeks, and 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 I'm trying to cram everything in, just everything I can possibly do. I want to do my second book as an audio book. I want to get this done. I want to get that done, and just go 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 go. And a couple of days ago, I was feeling like, oh man, I'm just overwhelmed. And I haven't been overwhelmed for any period of time in a long time, and it feels good to have felt that. So I get back into overwhelmed, and I'm like, no, you can't
Mm-hmm.
do that. And so I decided to scrap, trying to get my audio book for book two done before I leave, because I don't need to. It's me trying to cram everything in, and I think that's just the same as it's the same as sugar, it's the same as porn, it's the same as alcohol, it's the same as drugs. It's me, just being an extreme human being, and I have to pay attention to that with myself, and I have to allow myself grace, which I think is incredibly important. And the other thing it brought up for me is gratitude. I just thought about gratitude when you were talking about how you're able to separate yourself, and how you're able to be able to focus on Reverend Rachel and what Reverend Rachel needs to do for her own self. And it's beautiful to hear that, because knowing that this stuff works and seeing it work and watching it work with other people makes me incredibly grateful.
I think the recovery journey is so profound, and you don't have to have a addiction that's taken over your life to step into awakening to remembering who you are. And I loved when I had a class in the Unity Church that I've attended forever, and they had a how did unity get started? And they talked about in the class how Bill and the 12 steps has a similar foundation and was crossed over in New Thought, and that is a spiritual program. And so when you think about having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps in the 12th step, this part of us being the doers and having something that is supposed to fix it or control or addiction or whatever it is coming outside of our connection with the universe. And I love having become a metaphysical minister and teaching spirituality and being a spiritual teacher and having a spiritual community now, this awareness even more deeply at what the 12 steps offered from a perspective that is around remembering that our mind wants to do, and we're being reminded to allow and to be part of. And, the third step prayer of co-creating and building a life together and doing the will, which I believe is your fullest self, to be invited to be your fullest self, allows us, when we're in a better space, to give ourselves grace and to say, whoa, I'm eating too much sugar. And what is that about? And for you, and you know why? Because I'm overwhelmed. That's why I'm eating too much sugar, because my business is a lot. And so how do I reward myself? Oh, I'm rewarding myself with sugar, just like I used to reward myself with alcohol. So it's giving me pause to say, how can I do this differently so that I have more space for myself? I don't have to push it, because if I believe and know that spirit is indeed guiding me and holding me, it will all work itself out so that I can be okay. That's the whole point, is to be full and okay.
It is. It truly is. And I love at this point in my life, and I don't necessarily even call it recovery anymore. I just call it life, because that's what it is. And one of the most beautiful things that I'm able to experience, and one of my favorite words in the English language is allow. And you mentioned that a couple of times. It's just, allowing myself to slow down, or allowing myself to stop long enough to take a look. What am I doing? And I ask myself this all the time. What am I doing? And is it working? And if it's not, I shift. And that's what I need to do. I need to continue to explore and continue to learn and continue to find out what works for me and find out what doesn't work for me. And that's such a beautiful unfolding process. And it's just, it reaches my soul when I take the time to be quiet, and I take the time to, and I meditate, and I do breathing practices, all of those sort of daily habits, that hit my soul. There's a lot of things that don't hit my soul, and for me, and paying the bills and doing all these things, and I have to take the time to disconnect from the normal every day. And if I don't take time to do that, um, I will be affected, and I will lose that connection that I so enjoy.
I think it's so interesting when I look back at myself prior to soul recovery. And one of the things that's so wild is how crammed with stuff that I put upon myself as if that could keep me from what I perceived to be difficult things to look at. And I think for anybody who might be still on the fence or watching other people who are struggling or in their own struggle, it's really about giving yourself grace for how our minds work and how much we protect ourselves and how being busy, 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 I never had quiet. My mom raised me as a Buddhist, and all she kept saying was, Rachel, just meditate for 5 minutes. You don't have to do 20 minutes or an hour. Just give yourself 5 minutes. And I couldn't give myself 5 minutes because something in me was on overdrive in my ego, fear, pain self. And the more that I've done this work and calmed down and healed and looked at and been tender to these parts of myself, I love silence. I have to have a spiritual practice in the morning. I listen to the woo-wooiest, kookiest music that I just love. I always have incense and a candle going. My whole system has changed. And so when we recognize that each part of our journey is where we're supposed to be, and to give ourselves grace and allowance to be in each of these phases, but to know that we're being called, I think we're being called, anybody who's listening to anything at any time that is a reminder from Spirit to go to your true essence of who you are. And it's not instantaneous. It's a windy, kooky road, and sometimes we fall all the way back to the beginning, kind of like Sorry, the game Sorry, all the way back. And sometimes, we get to gently progress forward, but this ability to know that you can completely change your mind and how it works is so profound. And that was the piece in Al-Anon, just to sort of come back to Al-Anon, because Al-Anon was such an important thing for me. AA and Al-Anon are such great programs, and they have to stay in their lane, which is why soul recovery opens up to whatever I decide that it is, which is so great, right? But when I went into Al-Anon, I was getting what I needed from AA, but it was the first place that I went where I really realized that busyness that was within me was consumed with stuff that I can't control. Not only are we powerless over somebody's addiction, we are literally powerless over every single thing outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And Buddhism teaches that our suffering comes from our clinging and attachment to something being different. And when I went into Al-Anon, it's as if all of the spiritual practices and principles that my mother had taught me in Buddhism, that I had been learning for 20 plus years in New Thought, broke open, and I could finally see that taking that time for myself in the mornings, in my contemplation of life, in my ability to let go of what my husband is doing or what my kids are doing, is the greatest gift that I can not only give myself, but to give to them. That if I really want to help them, the greatest gift that I can give them is for me to help and heal myself. And that's what I got out of the rooms of Al-Anon. And sometimes I went in as white-knuckled as I did into the rooms of AA. Can I not drink today? Can I not be completely consumed with my husband and my kids today? And slowly, 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 it's released, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes for my healing. And that has been the gift of the programs for me.
That's it, right? It's getting back to us, our true selves, and clearing away, they talk about clearing away the wreckage of the past, but it's clearing away the wreckage of anything that's in the way of me recovering the real me.
Hmm.
And I I was thinking there's a chapter in my book called The Nouns, and as you were mentioning, I'm not able to have any control over, anything outside of me. It's and how I put it in my book was, there's only three things I can't control, which are the nouns: people, places, and things. And that's it, right? I mean, and that's the most difficult thing sometimes, because we can want something so much more for other people than they want it for themselves. And that's a really difficult place to be, and it's an impossible place to be. um right, it's I've
It's
been
not
that.
impossible. I don't think it's impossible. I used to think it was impossible. I used to think that I used to wear with a badge of honor when I heard the saying that you're only as happy as your least happy child.
Mm,
I That said something to me. I had a kid who struggled. I had a kid who had a really, really hard time. He was in residential rehab by the time he was 16. He had mental health issues. He struggled. And I couldn't be happy because he wasn't happy.
mm.
And now that I've done what I call soul recovery and I've done all of this work, I can have compassion for their experience. And it isn't impossible. It's like my heart breaks. I can actually feel those feelings that I didn't know how to feel. I can sob and be sad for where my children are sometimes, or the world, or, people ask me as a minister, why is there war? Why is there evil? Why do people do things to other people that are terrible? That is a good question. And yet when we think that we can control that, we are taking on what isn't ours. So when I can see bigger, metaphysically speaking, I can't possibly understand what my kids' journeys are and what they need to go through to get to where they will go. I had to go through what I had to go through to get where I am today, and I'm not cooked yet. I still got a long ways to go, only 54. So when I let go of thinking that I might know better for their journey and started questioning and have curiosity for mine, the impossibility went away. It isn't impossible, it's just painful. And pain is okay. Attachment and clinging are what really create the suffering.
Right, exactly. Pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, which I 100% agree. It reminds me, there was a and I he was, I believe, a Unity minister, but Jack Boland, from a
Hmm.
long time ago, when I first got
Hmm.
into sobriety, and he used to say we're all in spiritual kindergarten. And I truly believe that about me, because as other very wise people used to say, that humility is remaining teachable, and being teachable. And so when I think of myself, you said I'm not cooked yet, and I'm 58, and I am far from cooked. I've got a lot of cooking left to do, and that's completely fine, because and I love that about the journey, because I'm not going it's not going to end,
Hmm.
as until they do whatever they do with me when it's over, in this body. um I'm just going to keep going, and I love that about the journey, right? I think that's one of the most beautiful things, that we have the ability to, um, to move toward, and to, I don't want to say strive, because it's not really strive. It's more, it's almost the opposite of strive. It's quieting, and it's listening, and it's allowing, and
Hmm.
and all of those, things that are not what many people do. And that's the, you mentioned the world, and how the world can be so crazy and unpredictable, and family, and all those sorts of things. And to not chase that is such a blessing.
It is. And when you make this shift, it's a perception shift that doesn't take much from this belief that I think that I had that the world was supposed to show up in this very specific way, and then it was like going to be like a page turner that looked, I already knew what the ending of the book was. I just didn't entirely know what the chapters were about. And then I was constantly disappointed because I had this level of expectation of who I thought people were supposed to be and how I thought it was supposed to be. I was miserable, right? Like I was trying
Mm.
to control the world and I was trying to understand, and I thought I was helping and bettering by telling people how it should be. Talk about non-humility. I had a huge amount of self-righteousness, which I still have to be mindful because it's sneaky self-righteousness.
Mm.
And now that my perception has shifted, I'm curious about this story. You know, it's like, I have no idea what my timeline is. This is my curriculum of life. When I started looking at it as more of a curriculum of life rather than some story or movie that I've already produced and I'm just waiting for it to turn out the way I wanted, I stopped being a victim. I
Mm.
stopped feeling like it was happening to me and I was being screwed all the time. And I started being curious and I started seeing everybody else in their experiences with like so much more grace and compassion, and not taking it personally. The four agreements are some of the four most beautiful. Just do those. Don't take it personally. Be impeccable with your word. Don't make assumptions, and do your best. Just live with that. And if you can do, especially don't take it personally and don't make assumptions, success, right? So the journey for me has become so different because I'm not a victim anymore.
Mm.
I'm not pissed about the ride. Now I'm like excited and exuberant and curious about what's next. And I trust, and this is the piece about spirituality, I trust and know that I'm being guided. I trust and know in what that is for me, whatever that is for everybody. I love that about 12 step. I love that about uh, spirituality. No one is telling you what that needs to be. They're saying you discover that for yourself. But when you trust in it, you are the co pilot, and the pilot has got you, and it changes everything.
It does change everything, and I can just that resonates so well with me because, and I say this to people, and they look at me like I'm nuts, but I say, I do what's in front of me to be done, and then the next thing that I need to do shows up. And when I get my sticky little fingers in there and and try to control that or try to think, okay, that's when I get overwhelmed. That's when I get
Hmm.
full of all my stuff, and I have to just back away and allow myself to back away from that. And that's just such a beautiful, that trust and that faith is so powerful, and such a great, just sort of groove. And another one of my favorite words is resonance. What is resonating in here, and how that relates to the faith and the trust. And because I know if it's resonating here, it's right, and that's where I need to go, and that's what I need to do next, and et cetera, et cetera. So beautifully said, Reverend Rachel, and thank you for that. um
You're welcome. I love these conversations, and I think the resonance that's so interesting is my entire friend base has changed. My whole life has changed. The way that I live my life has changed. And for somebody that didn't think that you could possibly not have fun without a margarita or a glass of wine in your hand, I wouldn't change it for anything. I will take this resonance over that dysfunctional crap that I was living in any day.
any day, any day. Absolutely. And I think we talked about this a bit ago when I was on your podcast, and but success in life to me and there's a lot that goes into it, but it's waking up in the morning with a smile on my face,
Mm-hmm.
and just ready to go, ready to face the day. And I would not trade that for anything. I will not trade that for anything, because it's just a beautiful way to experience life and experience my soul and experience my heart, and all of those things just play into that, and it's beautiful.
I still see people who are struggling with addiction, including my kids. And there's this belief that smoking pot or drinking or whatever is calming you down. And I believed that. I thought that that was the truth too. And somebody like me who had 7 to 10 level anxiety every single day. I've been on and off medications for depression and anxiety since I was 17 years old. I can now see how clearly it's just putting fuel on the fire. You're just literally, you're pouring fuel on a fire
Mm.
by using, by being checked out, by being afraid. And instead of feeling like here's the answer and here's what you should do, my heart just feels for people because I was so there.
Mm.
And now that I'm on this other side, it seems like an easy gap to cross, but it's not. And it took a lot of work. It took a lot of work. And I don't really like the work. I don't like the word work, so I often use the word process. But it's this slow unfolding and those little baby steps of not just what to do in the day of, I'm going to be on the podcast now, and then after this, I'm going to go get my oil changed, and then I'm going to upload the podcast for tomorrow. But it's like inside of those spaces of being present with myself in a way that I couldn't be before because I was so distracted and I was in so much pain. And that's the gift, is being incredibly aware of the preciousness of our life, which I never felt that way before, um, and the preciousness of our ability to hold our happiness for ourselves, that it isn't anybody else's to determine, it's ours. I am now not as happy as my least happy child. I am now as happy as I determine myself to be. And I
Mm.
learned that by starting in the rooms of AA and in Al-Anon. I don't attend those meetings anymore because they don't resonate with me. But if I get a craving or if I feel like I got to go back, I will be there in a second. But my life is having had a spiritual awakening. And it is living that every single day. And for that gift, it's been this slow and steady bit of doing one thing to the next thing to the next thing. And it just continues to unfold. And it's incredible.
It is incredible, and I love to hear that. I have not been I've not been to an AA meeting in a long time, and I went, I'll say, religiously for probably 8 years, 9 years
Mm-hmm.
maybe, and and it's the 12 steps is such a beautiful way to for me, it was a great way to get started,
Mm-hmm.
and to be sober and to really start to recover. And as you say, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, it's to me, it was sort of a platform where I could, I don't want to say launch, but I could find more from that platform, and I
Mm-hmm.
could explore from that platform, and I didn't, at one point, I didn't have to worry about the drinking or the drugs anymore. So it was, the soul quest became my quest.
Yeah.
And that's been my quest now for a long, long time, and continually unfolding. I loved when you said process, because one of the things that I don't know if they say it anymore, but they used to say, it's a process, not an event.
Mm-hmm.
I don't show up. It's not a baseball game. It takes a long time. And that's the beautiful part about it for me, because I love that it'll just go until I go, and then whatever happens after that, it could still keep going, and that's fine. I'm I'm considering sort of this life in this body, but that adventure, it's become, and I don't mean it sort of whimsically from an adventure perspective, but it is an adventure because it's just a beautiful unfolding over time. And
Absolutely.
right, and that's just what makes it so incredible.
I love that there is more opportunities to find spiritual healing and sobriety in new and different ways. AA was it, right, for a long time, and now it's just one of many. And I think that the key is to find what works for you, what resonates with you. And if you are interested in recovery, if you are interested in finding yourself, you are interested in a wholeness and really deeply healing, you will get it.
Mm.
It is not the room that you are in, it's your determination of what you want for yourself. And the success really lies in your commitment to yourself. I was coaching somebody yesterday and she said, "But how do you really stop drinking?" And I said, I got off that airplane on the day that I got sober, and I knew that it was going to be hard, and I made a decision to stop drinking. And then I went and I used all the tools that it took so that I had the resources and I had the support to white knuckle it for the year that it took me to white knuckle it to get to where I am. But you have to make a decision that you're ready to heal yourself. And I think that there's a lot of grace that can happen in all of the modalities that are available right now. And that piece to me is amazing. Your podcast for people to listen to, my podcast for people to listen to. I have a community, and there are, Annie Grace with This Naked Mind, I think, turned it upside down to be able to open up to these different ways of seeing recovery. And ultimately, this journey is yours, and nobody is going to hand it to you. So it's about really deciding for yourself that you're worth it. And so I still get some backlash for not going to meetings anymore. And I couldn't have done it without him for the first couple of years. But I live a spiritual life, and I don't think that Bill set it up and said for the next 50 years, you got to show up 5 meetings a week to be okay. But if that's what people want to do for themselves and that's their journey, I think it's essential that they do what works for them. And so I think the more grace that we can have with each other to really support each other, not in our illness, but in our healing. I love speaking more about the healing. I love to really embody what we want to draw to ourselves as a metaphysical minister. That's essential. I don't see anybody as broken. I don't see there anything wrong with anyone. I don't see disease. But I see that we have to go through what we went through to remember our wholeness. And wherever you get that is where you should get it.
Couldn't agree more. And I think it's wonderful that I popped my head up after being sober for a long time and not going to meetings, and I engaged in social media, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff out there that people can do, to just find support, right? It used to be just meetings, and that's how I came up in sobriety, and it worked great. But I think there must be an openness. There must be an openness to potentially other modalities and other ways to find that spirituality and what really is our light inside. There's a lot of ways to do that. You had mentioned growing up in a Buddhist household. I mean, that's a beautiful light, that people can find themselves and find their souls, or uncover their souls, or recover their souls.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So as we wind it down here, one thing that I think is so important to understand, and I'd love to hear from you, Reverend Rachel, if somebody's starting on this journey and starting on the healing path and just getting out of the gate, whether it's with addictions or any other sort of dysfunction, codependency, whatever that is, what would be the advice that you would give them as they start?
Yeah, I think the advice, thank you for asking. I think the advice that I'd really give is to be gentle to themselves and to recognize that this is a deep healing of past trauma and beliefs and patterns that we've created, and that there is nothing wrong with us. We just need to remember who we are and to allow themselves to listen to the voice that really is within them that will guide them to the right place to do it, and to start to trust that voice. So if you feel the urge to go to an Al-Anon meeting or to go to an AA meeting, go and try it and listen to your internal self that is really calling for you to be well, to be healthy. And that piece, I think, allows us to make decisions and changes within ourselves that isn't all the chatter from the outside saying, this is what you should do, this is how you should do it. You actually know, but you need to be committed to wanting it for yourself, and then do the work and the process that it takes on your own gentle time. For some people, it's faster. For some people, it's slower. But it's reminding people that they're not alone and that other people have been through it. And the more that you can be around people who get you for whatever it is, the more you can stop judging yourself and open to the healing that you deserve.
For sure. That's that community and that like-mindedness, I think, is indispensable. It's
Mm-hmm.
absolutely indispensable. Thank you for that wisdom. I think that's just um, being gentle with ourselves is something that, I've never been a person necessarily accused of being gentle with myself, and it's something I'm learning all the time, and I'm continuing to learn as I go along. So thank you for that. How do we find you, Reverend Rachel, in terms of online or social media or website? If you could let folks know, it would be great.
Absolutely. The website's recoveryoursoul.net, and that's the hub of where you can find everything. The Recover Your Soul podcast is on all streaming platforms and has a new episode every Monday. And then my bonus content, which is what Daryl has, his interview is coming up on soon, is on Fridays on Apple Podcasts and Patreon. And I offer spiritual coaching, and I do have a free support group the first Monday of every month, and we talk about soul recovery and connection with each other, and all are welcome. And it's just really amazing to be building a community that is around wanting to be whole and have our wholeness completely embraced by others as we do this journey. And I am also pretty excited to be moving into a new platform with Awaken Your Soul as a TV program on the upcoming Affinity Network. So that's going to be a new, exciting adventure for me.
That is so cool. I'm so happy for you for doing everything that you're doing and helping people and your authentic nature and your honesty and all of these things just shine through. So
Mm,
so you're a wonderful asset to this world.
thank you. Thank
Really
you. Thank you.
appreciate that. And thank you so much for coming on with us today. I really appreciate it, Reverend Rachel, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.
Me too. Let's stay in touch, and being sober friends and community is essential for us all to be connected and to continue to grow ourselves.
It is. Thank you so much.